stories.
Please don't kill me. I have a lot to live for. I have a wife and kids.
I used to work at Borders way back when, though I had another job at the mall. Something about being at the bookstore made me much more recognizable. I guess I often had people approach me when I was on the street, or they would ask me about the store's sales, etc. while I was at a drive-through window. It was mostly harmless stuff, though I got some creeps on occasion. At the time, I had a dating profile up, but I had to take it down because I started getting weird messages from men saying they saw me at the grocery store or something and had wanted to touch themselves. Just bizarre crap. The killing blow that made me finally close it, however, came shortly before my 19th birthday. I was checking out my account after work, and I see a message titled, "We have met," which immediately creeped me out. I clicked on it and it said, "Sort of." Before proceeding to go into this very weird graphic description of this guy, who is apparently so thrilled by my cashiering skills that I caused a stirring in his loins, this email was seriously like 3 pages long, talking about how sexually excited he was and all of the things he could do to my young body. I was horrified to think that one of my customers had been looking at me like that, thinking those things. I clicked on his profile, no photo. It said he was 56 and single, but no other information. I needed to know what he looked like, which is the only reason I replied, and I imagine that was his game all along. I didn't respond to any of the other stuff he said. I asked him if he'd send me a photo. He told me that he couldn't put one up because he's sort of a public figure, but he told me he'd email it to me. It took him 2 days to get back to me, though. Those were 2 very long days, which I waited. I looked at my message history and discovered that this guy had actually written me many times. I had ignored him because, 1, no pictures, and 2, way out of the age group I was looking for. Out of morbid curiosity, I looked at all the messages. All of them were filled with sexually graphic things he wanted to do to me. He talked about fantasies of using me with another man that he knew, acting out rape scenes, tying me up, etc. Some of the details were specific to me, which leads me to believe he wasn't just sending them in mass to every young woman on the site. Meanwhile, this guy is older than my dad. I spent the next 2 days tensing up around every older man who came in. I was afraid to be too friendly to any of them for fear that one of them would be this guy, and he'd take it as a go-ahead to come at me. I was having a birthday celebration the day he finally got back to me. The moment I saw his name, I got a bad feeling in my gut. I couldn't immediately place it, but I knew there was something wrong with this person writing these things to me. I stared at it for a moment, positive I knew this guy, but my brain would not let it click. I texted my friend to confirm with her as it began to dawn on me. This man was my high school principal. I was horrified. I was still 18 at the time, which means that he must have been creeping on a bunch of us all along. I remember being alone with him in his office, and it makes me feel uneasy. Is he just perched and waiting for girls to graduate so he can legally pounce? I wrote him back and told him, "I don't know if you remember me, but you were my high school principal, and I happen to know that you are married." He did not reply, and I thought that was the end of it. I was still super creeped out for a while after that, though, just knowing how long he had been thinking about me and sending me these graphic messages when he had been an authority figure in my formative years. Almost a year passed without incident, and he didn't come in when I was there. But one day I started ringing someone up without getting a good look at his face. It was a friendly exchange, right up until I made eye contact. It was him again, and he was grinning at me. I put his stuff in his bag and turned away from the register, but he stayed where he was. I pretended to organize some returns, but he just kept standing there, silently, not moving or anything. I knew he was watching me, but I didn't want to look. The moment lasted far too long. So I finally grabbed my headset and asked a manager to come to the front of the store. He hurried out after that, and I never saw him again.
Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals, because I give it to known local charities instead, where I can be sure that the money is going to a specific cause. There's one panhandler, though. He always sang opera music, quite beautifully, all things considered, even though it was clear that he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness. Begging for tips. I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money, and I don't like carrying coins, so I gave what I could. It wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up a conversation with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad. He was probably in his 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly have a quick chat about the news, or the weather, or whatever. Nothing deep, you know? Sometimes he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obligated to reciprocate with something at least superficial. He'd blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything. I'd be like, oh, wow, sorry to hear about that. I play volleyball myself. Not for a scholarship, though. I'll see you around. Okay. Once Wendell called me over while I was walking, with a professor, or my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I went over just to say a quick hello and introduce my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified, and asked why Wendell knew my name. I explained our little friendship. He said the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured he was being elitist, and I think he could tell I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject, just before I left, he stated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in the city, or even give them money, because they chronically are homeless. To have criminal records or addictive histories. I was surprised, because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with Wendell as a victim of a post-capitalist society, and all the other things I'd learned in his very own classes, but he wasn't having any of it. Basically saying, however, Wendell became chronically homeless. Now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. Kind of shook my head, thinking, okay, boomer. If anything, felt fortified by the warning, like it was a confirmation that I was a radical, doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him. But the very next time I talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant. I wasn't sure why. Until what he said. So your boyfriend, you two live together or what? And I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, what boyfriend? And he said the guy that I met from yesterday, you were walking down the street with. I laughed, explaining that it wasn't my boyfriend. It was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden, he wasn't irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him, and he'd have a flower for me, or a metal machine piece. I never refused, because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flower once, and when I explained, she said it was weird. I thought she was also just being elitist, and that I was enlightened, bridging the class divide, superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it was just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, brought it up with me again, a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, how he even almost went to college, but then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship, and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said, sparing the details. He did talk for half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use, and he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend overreacted to something he'd done, derailed his life besides the drugs. So I decided maybe I should think about distancing myself just a little bit. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit, and classes went virtual. So to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house. Still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background. And I thought, aw, I forgot all about him. I hope he's doing all right. And that was that. I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times, subconsciously, and I'd ignore it, but it kept coming back. So I decided to go and watch it again. That's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. Freaked me out a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It isn't that far from the college either. It was probably just a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people. Felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, he definitely followed me, because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? A type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured I'll never see him, anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon. It doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, just one thing. A girl from my high school, who also ended up at my college, called me, and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown, and a beggar asked me about you. Like, specifically, you. He knew you were on club volleyball. He knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought that you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first, because how would he know I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned she's been wearing a sweatshirt from our college. So I thought about it, and decided he probably saw that sweatshirt, figured she might know me from college since we were both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought that it was sweet, also a little weird, but he was a little weird, and that was part of his charm. I thanked her, but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I had decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I went back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but I was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been insisting that nothing was wrong. Everyone else was just being paranoid and an elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings, or reading too far into the situation, but I figured he'd get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother, in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working or in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on, because we aren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined. His state was being hit pretty hard. He was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door. When he turned, he looked royally pissed at me. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on there," closed the door despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face, and whisper yelling said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about. My first thought, cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thought that I could generate first thing in the morning. The only thing that I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only used to get into concerts, and obviously none lately, so I was really in shock. But my brother was still going, as best as I can remember, because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. This is so not cool. You didn't even ask." I couldn't have said yes anyways, but you didn't even think to ask. I realized that didn't line with being arrested, so I finally was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy. Older, 45 maybe. Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus. Dad's gonna end you, and then have a heart attack, and die himself. Which will definitely hurt Mom. And you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be social distanced? You can go to a hotel, because he isn't coming in here." I wasn't a dick to him, out of respect for you. But if he doesn't leave now, that's definitely gonna change. So I had no idea what he was talking about. None whatsoever. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet. Because you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him, or thought about him. My whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise, faint background noise, compared to all the stuff that I was going through. So I just said the first thing that comes to mind. "Dude, I don't know what you're getting at, and why you're so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. He said, "We're adults. Come on, don't lie to me. I'm not Mom and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." And I said I wasn't lying. And I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I genuinely was serious. So now he was as confused and irritated as I was. And he was like, he didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name. He rattled off a ton of extra info. I think he said, yeah. He said you guys had a fight, and he was here to work things out. Now I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, huh? Maybe dreams do come true? Might as well see who this is. But I also was starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it could be one thing if this happened on campus or back home, but I had changed state. My brother moved to this state for school, and I don't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing and looked through the peephole. I almost didn't recognize him at first, because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothing, for the first time since I've known him. But sure as shit, it was Wendell standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared that I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding, like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch, tried to collect myself a little bit. My brother thought this was affirming that there really was some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known. So it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic "what will grandma think" stuff. Finally, he realized I was tearing up, and he sat down, calmed me down, apologized, and said we'd figure it out. And I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What, you didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" he asked, still thinking the guy was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he finally grasped how creepy it was at the moment, because he was like, "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this for you." He went to the door, called from behind it, "Yo, just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning, dude. You should do the same. I'm taking this social distancing real seriously," and then winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells the story, it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her, and I'll take her anywhere that she wants to go. Tell her that for me. And don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said back, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem. Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked completely different than what I've seen him. Even than a few seconds earlier when I'd glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match. Eyes bugged out of his head, white stuff caked on the corners of his mouth that I haven't noticed at first, shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. Started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch ass. Let her out. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or a reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run, or even move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. I was so anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I had missed all the signs leading up to this, all the opportunities to prevent it, that our friendship was never the wholesome thing that I thought it was. Though, of course, that's something I had already begun to grapple with before this day, and had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among all of them. All I could do was scream, not words, just "Ah!" and cover my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he's an athletic guy, but I don't think he's ever actually been in a physical fight. Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through, and there was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved. I think even I stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things he was shouting started to make even less sense along the lines of, "Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you I couldn't be stopped." And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which was almost made my brother really squeamish, made him realize that this was real. And he finally yelled, "Damn it, sis, just call 911, while he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into, even though he was nowhere close to breaking it down. I really don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell him his girlfriend was trapped in the house, and he'd come all this way just to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain he hadn't taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of my whole event is, as they carted Wendell away for arrest, he started singing opera music. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons just from this saga.
If you are new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.